Okay, imagine this for a second. You're out on the open ocean, like late 1800s, days from anywhere. No radio, no GPS, nothing. Just water, horizon, everywhere you look. And then you spot another ship. But something's wrong, shit. Well, something's wrong. It's just drifting, kind of aimlessly.
Yeah, sails may be up, but torn, flapping, not sailing right.
Exactly. And as you get closer, you see it looks fine, basically. It's afloat, no fire, no obvious big problem. But then you board it, and it's completely empty, utterly deserted, not a soul.
Chilling. And that's not fiction. That's the real story of a Mary Celeste. Probably the most famous ghost ship ever.
It really is the ultimate riddle from the sea, isn't it? You find this ship perfectly seaworthy.
Loads of food, water still there, the cargo's secure in the hold.
And zero sign of any struggle, any, immediate danger.
Yeah.
But the people, just gone.
They vanished over the Atlantic. It's baffling.
And that's exactly what we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into the Mary Celeste. We'll use the sources we've gathered to lay out the facts, look at the strange clues they found.
Explore the theories from the sort of plausible ones to the really out there ideas.
And try to understand why this mystery, more than 150 years later, still has such a grip on us. It's a real maritime enigma.
Definitely.
So let's rewind a bit. Before this infamous trip, before she was even the Mary Celeste, she started life differently, right?
That's right. Built up in Nova Scotia, Canada. Launched in 1861. Her original name was the Amazon.
And things didn't exactly go smoothly from the start, did they?
No, it seemed kind of cursed, almost. The sources mention quite a few early mishaps. Her very first captain fell ill and actually died during the maiden voyage before they had even finished loading cargo.
Wow, talk about a bad omen.
Right. And then under a new captain, she hit some fishing gear off Maine, later collided with another ship in the English Channel, sank it. Just not a great track record.
So a troubled beginning. Yeah. And her luck didn't really turn around.
Not immediately. In 1867, she got caught in a nasty storm, wrecked pretty badly off Cape Breton Island, but she was salvaged. And that's the turning point, really. American owners bought the wreck, fixed her up.
And that's when she became the Mary Celeste.
Yep. Renamed in late 1868. Then, in 1872, she got a major refit. Made her bigger, basically.
And after that refit, she got a new captain, Benjamin Briggs.
Correct. And Briggs is really central here. He wasn't just some random skipper. Very experienced, well-respected, known to be a devout Christian. He actually bought a share in the ship himself, so he had skin in the game.
Right. Invested his own money. Shows confidence.
And maybe tragically, given what happened, he decided to bring his wife, Sarah, and their little 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, along for this voyage.
Oh, wow. So it was Captain Briggs, his wife, his daughter.
And a crew of 7 experienced sailors. Handpicked, apparently. So 10 people in total heading out.
10 souls. A capable crew for that kind of ship, post-refit.
Definitely. Standard stuff.
Okay, so picture the scene. Late October, 1872. Pier 50, New York City. The Mary Celeste is loading up.
And the cargo was 700 and 701 barrels of industrial alcohol, denatured alcohol, heading for Genoa, Italy.
Okay, industrial alcohol. Seems mundane, but that cargo becomes pretty important later when people start theorizing.
Hugely important, yeah. It's key to some of the main theories.
So they finished loading, left the pier November 5th, but didn't head straight out.
No, weather was bad. They anchored off Staten Island for a couple of days, finally sailed out into the Atlantic proper on November 7th, 1872, bound for Italy.
And here's a little detail the sources bring up another ship, the Dei Gratia.
Right. A brigantine, like the Mary Celeste. Also getting ready to sail for Genoa, but from Hoboken, New Jersey, just across the river.
Captained by a David Morehouse. And there's this suggestion, maybe, that Briggs and Morehouse knew each other.
Yeah, some accounts say they might have even had dinner together before the Mary Celeste left. But the evidence for a close friendship is a bit thin, based mostly on later memories. Still, it's an interesting connection.
Friends were just passing ships. The Dei Gratia left 8 days after the Mary Celeste, November 15th.
8 days behind. Which makes what happens next just, well, incredibly strange.
Because it's the Dei Gratia, the ship that left later, that finds her.
Exactly. December 4th, 1872, they're roughly halfway between the Azores Islands and Portugal. And they see this ship.
Acting weirdly, you said?
Yeah, the crew on the Dei Gratia noticed her sails were oddly set, some torn, and she was just sort of drifting, yawing unsteadily, not sailing with purpose.
Captain Morehouse sends over a boarding party.
Sends his first mate, Oliver DeVoe, and the second mate, John Wright, in a small boat to check it out.
And they climb aboard this silent, drifting ship and realize...
it's the Mary Celeste.
And the scene they find. This is the heart of the whole puzzle. What did DeVoe and Wright actually report seeing?
Emptiness. Complete silence. Ship totally deserted.
Sails partly set, but like you said, in bad shape. Torn, rigging damaged, hanging loose.
Right. The main cargo hatch was closed and secured. But the forward hatch and the lazarette hatch, that's a small hatch near the stern, they were both wide open, their covers just lying on the deck next to them.
Open hatches. Okay. And the crucial thing.
The ship's lifeboat. It was a small yawl, normally kept on top of the main hatch. It was gone. Missing.
So the only way off the ship, besides jumping overboard, was taken.
Yeah.
Any other clues? What else did they notice?
Well, the binnacle, the stand holding the compass, had been knocked out of place. Its glass cover was broken.
Suggests maybe rough seas or some kind of jolt.
Possibly. And there was water in the hold. About 3.5 feet.
Is that a lot? Like, was she sinking?
It sounds like a lot, but for a ship that size, it wasn't critical. It was definitely manageable with the ship's pumps. Not a reason to panic and abandon ship on its own.
Okay. What else?
They found a sounding rod, just a makeshift one, apparently used for checking that water depth, just lying on the deck, like someone had used it and just dropped it.
And inside the cabins?
Wet. Water had clearly sloshed around, probably coming through the open hatches and companionways, but things weren't totally ransacked. In Captain Briggs's cabin, some personal things were scattered. His sword was found in its sheath under his bunk. But, and this is really significant, his important documents, logbooks apart from the ship's main log, and especially his navigational instruments. The chronometer, the sextant, they were missing, gone.
That is significant. Taking the chronometer and sextant. That suggests they planned to navigate, right? It wasn't just leaping blindly into a boat.
Precisely. It hints at an orderly departure, maybe hurried, but planned to some degree. They thought they'd need to know where they were going.
What about the galley, the kitchen?
Everything stowed neatly. No sign of a meal being prepared or interrupted, but plenty of food and water provisions left in the stores. Enough for months.
And the big negative finding, what wasn't there?
Yeah, this is critical. No signs of a fight, no bloodstains, despite some later confusion about that. No signs of piracy, no struggle. And importantly, no evidence of any fire or major explosion having occurred on the ship itself.
So no violence, no fire. Just empty. And the ship's log, did it give any clues?
It did, up to a point. The last entry was dated 8 a.m. November 25th, 9 days before the day Gracia found her.
And where did the log say she was on the 25th?
Near Santa Maria Island, which is the easternmost island in the Azores.
Okay, so near the Azores on November 25th, but she was found.
Nearly 400 nautical miles east of there, towards Portugal, on December 4th.
So in those 9 days, she sailed herself unmanned almost 400 miles.
Seems so. With those partial, ragged sails, it really underlines that the ship itself was fundamentally sound, seaworthy.
It really does. So the immediate conclusion for the De Gracia crew and Captain Morehouse must have been
that everyone on board had left the ship in that missing yawl. The big question wasn't if they left, but why they would abandon a perfectly good ship in the middle of the Atlantic.
Which takes us to the next phase, the official investigation. The De Gracia crew sailed the Mary Celeste alongside their own ship to Gibraltar, right, to claim salvage.
That's right. They arrived on December 13th. The Mary Celeste was immediately impounded by the Vice Admiralty Court.
And the salvage hearing started pretty quickly.
Yeah, just 4 days later, December 17th, led by the Chief Justice, Sir James Cochrane. But the key figure driving the investigation was the Attorney General for Gibraltar, a guy named Frederick Solly Flood.
And Solly fled. He had strong feelings from the start.
Oh, absolutely. The sources paint him as, let's say, quite convinced of his own opinions, and he was immediately suspicious. He did not buy the simple abandoned ship narrative. He smelled foul play.
Foul play? What made him think that?
Well, the testimony from the De Gracia crew about finding the ship deserted, the missing boat, the slightly odd state of things, it just set off alarm bells for him. He seemed determined to find evidence of a crime.
So he ordered detailed inspections. What did his guys find?
The official surveyor of shipping, John Austin, examined the ship. He noted some cuts on the ship's bow timbers. He claimed they looked like they were made deliberately with a sharp instrument.
Deliberate cuts, like trying to fake damage.
Yep, that's what Flood immediately jumped on. Austin also found some reddish stains on the deck and on Captain Briggs' sword, which he initially thought might be blood.
Ah, okay, so possible weapon, possible blood.
Exactly. Flood seized on this. Although, interestingly, Austin also mentioned finding a vial of sewing machine oil belonging to Mrs. Briggs standing upright in her cabin, which he used as proof that the ship hadn't encountered heavy weather. Kind of contradictory, maybe.
Yeah, seems a bit selective. But the cuts and the blood were enough for flood.
They seem to be. Other inspectors, including captains from the Royal Navy who were consulted, agreed the bow cuts looked deliberate. They found other marks too, maybe an axe mark on the rail. It all fed Flood's suspicion of violence.
So where did this lead him? What was Flood's official theory that he reported back to London?
His conclusion was pretty dramatic. He believed the crew had broken into the alcohol cargo, remember industrial alcohol? Not drinkable, but maybe they tried, gotten drunk, and then murdered Captain Briggs, his wife, daughter, and the ship's officers in some kind of frenzy.
Wow. Using the sword and maybe an axe.
That was the implication. Then, he theorized, they deliberately cut the bows to fake a collision, maybe as a cover story, and fled in the yawl, vanishing completely. He was also deeply suspicious of the De Gracia crew, suggesting they might have been involved somehow, or at least found the Mary Celeste much earlier and somewhere else.
That's quite a story. Was there anything to challenge Flood's version?
Oh, yes. Quite a bit, actually. James Winchester, he was one of the main American co-owners of the Mary Celeste. He traveled all the way to Gibraltar. He testified forcefully about Captain Briggs's high character, his temperance, his experience, completely refuted any idea Briggs would be involved in fraud or allow indiscipline leading to mutiny.
Okay, character witnesses. What about the physical evidence? The blood?
That's the biggest challenge. Proper scientific analysis was eventually done on those stains Flood was so sure about. The result, conclusively not blood. Some sources say it might have been rust, or maybe residue from the cargo, or something else entirely.
A huge blow to the murder theory.
Absolutely massive. But frustratingly, the official report confirming it wasn't blood wasn't widely publicized for years, so the idea of violence kind of lingered in the public mind.
And the cuts on the bow.
Later on, a U.S. Navy captain named Schufeld examined photos and reports of the cuts. His expert opinion was that they were consistent with natural wear and tear from the sea on the timbers, not deliberate damage from an axe or tool.
So Flood's whole theory was looking pretty shaky. What did the court finally decide?
Well, without concrete proof of foul play, Flood couldn't really make his case stick. The court had to release the ship, which they did in late February 1873. But the salvage award given to the De Gracia crew in April was telling. Only 1,700 pounds, that was just about a fifth of the total estimated value of the ship and cargo.
That seems low for salvaging an entire ship.
It was unusually low, and it strongly suggests the court, especially Chief Justice Cochrane, who openly criticized Captain Morehouse in his judgment, still harbored suspicions. Even though they couldn't prove anything, they weren't fully convinced the De Gracia crew's story was the whole story. It unfairly cast a shadow over Morehouse and his men for the rest of their lives, really.
And that lack of a clear answer, that lingering suspicion from the official inquiry, that's basically what opened the floodgates for all the speculation, right?
Exactly. The authorities couldn't solve it, so everybody else started trying. And because the known facts are so bizarre, the theories have run wild ever since.
Okay, let's dig into some of those theories. We've heard Solly Flood's murder mutiny idea, but modern commentators, like Paul Begg, who's written extensively on this, tend to dismiss it. Why?
Well, mostly because of what wasn't taken. If it was pirates or a mutiny over valuables, why leave behind the cargo? Why leave personal belongings, money boxes untouched? It doesn't make sense.
And the idea that the De Gracia crew was involved
Also doesn't really hold water. The De Gracia was documented as being slower than the Mary Celeste and left 8 days later. The timeline just doesn't work for them to somehow catch up, intercept, murder everyone, stage the scene, and then sail the Mary Celeste back to where they claim they found her without raising serious questions or leaving more evidence. There's just no proof.
Right. There was also that short-lived, pretty awful theory from John Gilbert Lockhart suggesting Captain Briggs himself snapped, maybe had a religious mania, and killed everyone.
Yes, but Lockhart quickly retracted that theory after Briggs's family vehemently defended his character and sanity. It just didn't fit the man anyone knew.
Okay, so if foul play seems unlikely based on the evidence, what about the lifeboat? They definitely left in the yawl. That seems to be the one solid fact.
It's the strongest piece of evidence, yes. The yawl was missing, so the focus shifts to why they got in it. The lifeboat hypothesis branches out here. Maybe the evacuation was meant to be temporary. Just get off the ship for a short while until some perceived danger passed.
Like what?
Well, one idea, suggested early on by Oliver Cobb, a relative of Briggs, was that they launched the yawl, maybe in rough seas or out of some caution, and decided to tow it behind the Mary Celeste for a bit, using a long rope, like the mainsail's halyard.
Okay, towing the lifeboat.
And then maybe the tow rope just parted, snapped. Suddenly, they're adrift in the small yawl, and the Mary Celeste, still under some sail, just drifts away from them faster than they can row, lost at sea.
That explains the missing boat and the ship sailing on alone. But it still feels weird. Why would an experienced captain like Briggs, with his wife and child, get into a tiny open boat in the middle of the Atlantic if the main ship was perfectly okay?
And that's the big sticking point. Experts like McDonald Hastings really hammered this home. Abandoning a sound vessel for a small boat is fundamentally illogical, unless you believe the ship is in immediate, catastrophic danger.
Right. So what could have created that sudden fear, that overwhelming sense of imminent disaster?
This brings us back to that cargo, the industrial alcohol, and Arthur N. Putman's theory about the fumes.
Tell us about that one.
Putman focused on the fact that only one boat was gone, and its rope seemed cut hastily. He knew alcohol cargo could be tricky, potentially releasing explosive vapors. He speculated there might have been rumbling sounds from the hold, maybe some leakage from barrels.
So the crew hears noises, maybe smells fumes.
And they start thinking, explosion, a big one. Maybe they opened the hatches, which were found open, remember, to try and vent the hold, or maybe to inspect what was going on.
And seeing or hearing something alarming down there triggers a panic?
Exactly. The theory goes, sheer panic. Get away from the ship now before it blows up. They pile into the yawl, maybe tie it temporarily, realize they need to get clear faster, cut the rope in haste.
And the Mary Celeste, maybe catching the wind, just sails away from them.
That's the idea. It fits the missing boat, the open hatches, the hasty departure implied by the cut rope, and the missing navigational gear if they thought they'd be adrift.
But again, the ship didn't explode. There was no fire damage, no major disruption to the cargo barrels found later.
That was always the main counter-argument, until some more recent work. There was a documentary in 2006 where chemist Andrea Cicella did an experiment. She recreated the conditions in the hold with paper cubes and butane gas to simulate the alcohol vapor buildup. And she showed you could get a type of explosion, a pressure wave explosion, that produces a big flash of flame and force, but consumes all the oxygen so fast it doesn't actually ignite the surroundings or leave scorch marks.
Wow. So a kind of invisible explosion, a big bang and flash, but no burn damage.
Essentially, yes. A dramatic, terrifying event that looks like the ship is about to blow sky high, but leaves little physical trace afterwards. If the crew witnessed something like that, even a smaller version, well, you can understand the panic. That experiment gave the fume theory a huge boost in plausibility.
Okay, that is genuinely compelling. It connects a lot of dots. What about other natural events, not necessarily the cargo itself?
Another strong contender is the waterspout theory.
Like a tornado over the water.
Exactly. Imagine a severe waterspout bearing down on the ship. That could easily explain the damaged rigging, the torn sails, the general wetness found everywhere on deck and below.
Okay, that makes sense. But why abandon ship?
Here's the clever part of the theory. Waterspouts are associated with extremely low atmospheric pressure at their core. That low pressure could, theoretically, suck water up from the ship's bilges through the sounding pipes or even into the pumps themselves. So the crew uses the sounding rod, the one found abandoned on deck, and gets a wildly inaccurate reading suggesting the ship is filling with water incredibly fast.
So they think they're sinking rapidly, even if they aren't.
Precisely. Combine the terrifying sight and sound of the waterspout, the wind and waves, the damaged sails, and a reading that says the ship is foundering beneath them. Panic evacuation into the yawl seems much more understandable.
And then, maybe the ship sails out of the waterspout's path, relatively unharmed, leaving them behind.
That's the idea. It ties together the weather damage, the water evidence, both real and perceived, the abandoned sounding rod, and the missing boat. It's quite elegant.
Any other natural theories?
People have suggested an underwater earthquake, a seaquake, could have shaken the ship, maybe damaged some barrels releasing fumes, back to the fume idea, caused general alarm. Possible, but less direct evidence. Simpler ideas like a pump malfunction causing a false reading, or fear of running aground near the Azores if they were becalmed. Those are harder to square with the fact the ship was found under sail hundreds of miles away.
And a single giant rogue wave.
Usually considered unlikely. A wave big enough to sweep all 10 people and the lifeboat off the deck would almost certainly have caused much more catastrophic structural damage to the ship itself, which wasn't found.
So, looking at the evidence we have,
Yeah.
the fume explosion theory, especially with that new experimental backing, and the waterspout theory, they seem like the front runners.
They do. Neither is perfect, neither explains every single tiny detail, perhaps, but they offer plausible mechanisms for why a competent crew would suddenly abandon a sound ship in apparent panic. It focuses on the fear of disaster rather than the disaster itself necessarily happening to the ship.
And it's that very lack of a perfect, definitive answer that made the Mary Celeste the icon she is, right? There were other abandoned ships found, but none captured the imagination quite like her.
Absolutely. Her name became shorthand for any unexplained desertion at sea, the ghost ship archetype.
And the story got embellished over time, didn't it? People started adding details that weren't true.
Oh, yeah. You hear stories about meals found still warm on the galley table, coffee steaming in mugs, livestock still alive on deck. None of that was in the original report from the De Gracia crew or the Gibraltar investigation. Pure folklore adding to the mystery.
And the biggest influence on the popular story wasn't even factual. It was fiction.
Kind of ironic, isn't it? Arthur Conan Doyle, yes, the Sherlock Holmes creator, wrote a short story in 1884 called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. It was heavily inspired by the Mary Celeste, but he changed almost everything. He called the ship the Marie Celeste, and that misspelling stuck massively. People still use it all the time.
Ah, so that's where Mary Celeste comes from. Doyle.
Yep. He changed the captain's name, the year, the location, and invented this whole complicated plot involving a vengeful ex-slave and a mutiny. Totally fictional.
But because it was Conan Doyle, and maybe because it offered an explanation, however wild, it just took off.
Exactly. It massively popularized the mystery, brought it to a huge new audience, but it also cemented inaccuracies, like the name, and probably fueled the idea that something violent must have happened.
And once the door to fiction was open, the theories got even crazier.
Oh, inevitably. Once you detach from the actual evidence, anything goes. Giant squid attacks became a popular pulp theory. Connections to the Bermuda Triangle, even though she was found nowhere near it. Alien abduction, you name it. Fun to speculate, but zero basis in the facts found on the ship.
So after all this drama, after the salvage case, what actually happened to the ship itself? Did her luck ever change?
Sadly, no. She seemed doomed to be unlucky. The cloud of suspicion from the Gibraltar hearings never really lifted. She became known as an unlucky ship, maybe even cursed. Owners found her hard to insure, hard to get crews for. James Winchester sold her in 1874 at a big financial loss. She passed through several more owners over the next decade, apparently losing money on pretty much every voyage.
The curse narrative really took hold then.
It seems so. There's even a story that another captain, Edgar Tuthill, died suddenly aboard her in 1879 while at port in St. Helena. That would make him the third captain associated with the ship to die unexpectedly.
Wow. Okay, so a troubled ship right to the end. How did her story finally conclude?
Her end wasn't a mystery, unfortunately. It was just sordid. Her last captain, a man named Gilman C. Parker, conspired with a group of Boston shippers in 1885. They deliberately loaded her with a cargo they knew was basically worthless things like old rubber boots, cheap cat food, but insured it for a huge sum way over its value. Then Parker intentionally sailed her onto a well-known coral reef, the Rochela Bank, off the coast of Haiti, and wrecked her. Tried to set her on fire, too, to destroy the evidence, but failed. It was pure insurance fraud.
So the great ghost ship mystery ended with a common crime.
Pretty much. Parker and the shippers were caught out and put on trial for conspiracy and fraud. Parker himself faced the very serious charge of barratry, intentionally wrecking your own vessel. That could even carry a death sentence back then, though it wasn't applied.
What happened at the trial?
It got messy. Ultimately, the evidence wasn't quite strong enough for criminal convictions on the main charges, partly because the fire didn't destroy the worthless cargo. The defendants eventually dropped their insurance claims, paid back some money. Parker was ruined professionally, though acquitted of barratry. He died in poverty not long after. And the sources mentioned that curse idea again. One of his co-conspirators reportedly went insane. Another committed suicide. Just added fuel to the Mary Celeste's dark legend.
And people have even tried to find the wreck recently.
They have. The adventure writer Clive Cussler led an expedition in 2001. They found wreckage on that same reef in Haiti, Rochela Bank, and initially thought they'd found her. Big news at the time. But later scientific dating of the timbers they recovered proved the wood came from trees felled years after the Mary Celeste was wrecked in 1885. So the wreck they found wasn't her.
Unbelievable. So even her final resting place is still a bit uncertain.
Adds one last layer of ambiguity, doesn't it? She just refuses to give up all her secrets.
It's true. You know, the Mary Celeste wasn't the only ship ever found abandoned. But there's something about her story. The specific state she was found in, the lack of any clear, undeniable explanation. It just launched her into legend like no other. She is the ghost ship everyone pictures.
That image just sticks, doesn't it? A perfectly fine ship, sailing along as if nothing's wrong. Maybe the sails are a bit ragged, but she's afloat, she's moving. But there's just nobody there.
It really tacks into something deep, I think. Our fear of the unknown, maybe. The sheer power and indifference of the ocean. How quickly things can go wrong out there.
Yeah, and the fragility of it all. You have this experienced captain, his family with him, a good crew, a standard voyage planned out, and then just poof, complete utter mystery. Only these few confusing clues left behind. It's the perfect setup for an enduring maritime legend.
And the fact that here we are, over 150 years later, running through theories, experiments, and we still don't have one single answer that fits every piece of the puzzle perfectly, and that's why we're still talking about it.
Absolutely. It's like you said earlier, sometimes the sea just keeps its secrets. We're left with the facts we have, and the rest is filling in the blanks with speculation, with imagination.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That history doesn't always give us neat conclusions. Sometimes the question mark is the final answer.
It often is with these deep-sea mysteries.
So for everyone listening, when you weigh it all up, the ship's condition, that missing boat, the open hatches, the water level, the cargo, the debunked stuff like bloodstains, the fume theory, the waterspout idea, the sheer fact she sailed on alone, what explanation resonates most with you? Or maybe, which possibility leaves you with the biggest chill? The Mary Celeste. She just keeps sailing through history, doesn't she? A silent, ghostly challenge to our need for answers.